They said, oh, the CA, you know what it's going to do? It's going to disenfranchise Muslims. They're going to lose their citizenship. The CA is not about denying anyone citizenship. It is about giving people citizenship. Now, why were those communities chosen? Because the states themselves are theological states. And in these states, these communities that chose to stay on or had no choice but to stay on were being almost exterminated, persecuted in ways that would make your heart bleed tears.
A news industry veteran with nearly 3 decades of experience in print and television journalism, consulting editor at Network 18, and now the author of Modi in India 2024 and the Battle for Bharat. Rahul Shivshankar, thank you so much for speaking to Brut. Everybody's seen you on television, you know, the news anchor doing the debates. But today we want to know a little bit about Rahul Shivshankar, the author.
Well, to begin with, I'm a Delhi boy. Some people tell me that I sound like one when I'm raging. So I'm a Delhi boy, lived all my life here. Studied in Delhi, did my graduation from DU, in fact, a BA Honours course in journalism. And then while I was actually in college, I started working as a freelancer for various print magazines. I'm actually by heart a print journalist.
Okay.
TV happened to me. It was also almost expedient. I found that while I was an assistant editor at the Times of India working on the edit page as a 28, 29-year-old, I just got married then. And he wasn't paying the bills. So I said, what to do? You know, I love writing. I love being part of that edit page space, which made you ideate every day. So you might, at least in my time, I'm talking about 2000, between 2000 and 2004. So you would sit alongside some real veterans, to borrow that phrase, and you would ideate, and then one person would be ascribed the responsibility of distilling everything that's been sort of enunciated in the room, and then you write a piece. Of course, with, you know, people now blogging and writing in their own little spaces, opinion pieces have really become opinion pieces. The editorial is becoming more and more sort of, I believe, redundant.
Pushed into a corner. Huh?
Yeah, it is literally pushed into a corner, and it's getting smaller and smaller. I think people want to read opinion because they either identify with one side or the other, and they want to feel a certain sense of perhaps you know, identify with a particular worldview, and they say, oh, this person gives me good points that I can actually pitch in my student groups, friends groups, circles, you know, family, whatever. So I think people are looking for that quick take.
Okay.
So to answer your question, I'm actually, the soul of me has been a writer from the time I've been a young man.
Right.
In my teens, late teens. And in fact, even in school, I was part of the editorial board of the school magazine. So it's been, for me, it's a full circle. A lot of work, a lot of opinion pieces written over the years allowed me to research, read, and think, and this book sort of came a little automatically in that sense. So I said, look, the central theme of the election is that the Prime Minister is turning India into some sort of a Hindu Rashtra, a very parochial and extremely angry republic that has a problem with minorities in general. And I said that that kind of approach to an election campaign means that you already got a very, very strong dividing line, you know, in the dialogue.
Right.
And it so came to pass that this alliance, India, what does it stand for? One of the I's stands for inclusivity. So they say that we are for inclusivity, which means that the other side is not for inclusivity. So actually it was a prescient thought. I'm sort of being a little immodest here, but I thought that perhaps if I were to focus on that, about where India's headed, and of course at that time, you know, one of the lead intellectuals on the other side, on the liberal sort of, I mean not liberal, but on the left-leaning side, we're all liberals, but the slightly sort of center-left side of the fence, Shashi Tharoor, he was sort of saying that India is becoming a Hindu Pakistan and all that. Now, as an editor of a news, channel and someone who engages and writes a column or was writing a column for the Times of India at that time, you begin to then say, have I got this wrong? Because I look at certain policy initiatives that the Modi government is taking and I think that some of them are very good. And I have, for example, Article 370 is something I championed as a 28-year-old on the edit page of the Times of India. So for me, I can't suddenly do a flip just because, they say, oh, speak truth to power. It's an ideological continuum. Every journalist's supposedly career. And you build on certain things. And of course, you can have, diverge from where you began. Maybe you have an epiphany. But in my case, I was pretty grounded in one side of the narrative. And I just said, look, I can't suddenly start going against it, but hey, maybe I'm making a mistake. Maybe the CA, maybe all of these people are pretty intelligent people, and if they're saying that this is going in the wrong direction, then maybe they're right, and I need to really look very closely at the arguments. So the book really is a very close examination of those arguments.
You mentioned Article 370 and I wanted to start with that. So just a few months after the Modi government had come to power in its second term in 2019, in August, the government abrogated Article 370. In your book, you have traced it back to Nehru's views on Kashmir, and I'd like to quote from it, and it was very interesting. You said, Nehru's idea of India was an argument against the parochialism of a Muslim Pakistan, or even by extension, a Hindu India, championed by advocates of a Hindutva worldview. For Nehru, Kashmir was going to be the idyllic rebuttal, the Indian haven that would showcase to the world the resilience of the unique Indian experiment with unity and diversity, which is in inverted commas. And Nehru wasn't about to let anyone, and most certainly not the Hindu right, saffronize his rainbow. How big a factor will abrogation of Article 370 possibly be in how India votes?
Look, I think it's very important. There are certain ideological pillars on the political side on which the government has based a lot of its outreach to the public. Now, why was Article 370 such a strong strand of the Bharatiya Janata Party, and before that, the iterations of the party? And why is it that Shyama Prasad Mukherjee really championed the abrogation? See, when you quote Nehru, for example, and I know where that quote is in the book, but you say that Nehru's idea of India was an argument against the parochialism of Muslim Pakistan.
Right.
What did Article 370 do? Article 370, it created a distinction between the people of Kashmir and the mainland. So there was not just a legislative divide, but also psychological divide. What it created was a big ghetto, where a particular group of people thought they were exceptional. That a large number of instrumentalities and institutions that govern the life of mainland Indians were not applicable to them, or they were not subjected to their oversight. So it created a culture of exceptionalism in the valley. And over the years, that culture of exceptionalism became so extreme because of what Pakistan was also doing in seeding a certain irredentist worldview, that even Kashmiriyat began to feel the pressures. And what was Kashmiriyat? Kashmiriyat was this all-inclusive sort of philosophy, mostly Sufi, where everyone could enjoy each other's culture without feeling threatened. But under Article 370, the Muslim valley, the Muslim dominant valley, began to sort of overshadow all the other regions. Because power is concentrated there, political power, that is. And this sort of architecture of otherness, as I called it, Article 370, it othered Kashmir from the rest of India. It also othered Kashmiris from their Indian brothers, because, as I said, it created this culture of exceptionalism. They began to also slightly turn against each other. So you had Shias who were not allowed to take out their own processions. You had Hindus, Kashmiri Hindus, and I don't like to call them Pandits because I'm part Kashmiri Hindu. And I believe that the word Pandit is used to sort of move a little away from the real reasons why that schism happened, and it was religious. So Kashmiri Hindus, we must use the word Hindus because it was Hindus, because they were Hindus, they were targeted. So you had a problem there also. Islam turned on some of those people. And we saw an exorcism in some ways. You know, they were driven out. So Article 370 became actually exactly opposite of what Nehru wanted. It became the extension of the two-nation theory. So it had to go. And I think that someone like Shyama Prasad Mukherjee had seen it coming. And there are passages in this book where I quote him, where he accuses Nehru of appeasement. And one has to understand that this Article 370 took, you know, Kashmiriyat out of Kashmir, totally. And the Bharatiya Janata Party sees this as an affirmation of Hindu religious rights. So, in a secular country, you cannot have exceptionalism, especially if a law or a series of laws advantages one community or a small number of communities over another community. In this case, of course, the Hindu community. So
let me go back a little bit. Where were you when the exodus of the Kashmiri Hindus took place?
Well, I was 15, and you know, we would go. So my great-grandparents, they ran a very successful business in Kashmir, and the company was called N.D. Radhakishan and Sons, and it was in construction and transportation. In fact, for a while we even had a monopoly really over transport there. And I remember Vidhu Vinod Chopra, when he met me, he's the director of Shikara, we were having an interview with him, and after the interview I told him about, he said, my God, I can't believe that you belong to that family. I said, yes. He says, you know, their trucks, because it was a transport business, we all, as in Kashmiri Hindus, fled in those trucks. So there's that scene in Shikara where all those trucks are sort of coming down.
Right.
Most of those trucks belonged to my family. So at that time, those trucks were their escape.
You remember spending summers, etc.?
Yeah, I do. I have to say that because my grandmother married out of state, she lost her inheritance rights. So the family business started sort of going towards the other side of the family. There were two brothers, let's put it like that, who, you know, had... so one brother, obviously, because his children were marrying within the state, you know, so got most of the controlling interests and stakes. So our trips to Kashmir became a little more infrequent, but our home was there. My dadi's home was there. So there was no question of, you know, not feeling the tug, you know. So we would definitely, and when all of that happened, we could see that it was turning. You know, the environment had become hostile towards Hindus there. And it's not just 1990, you know, that was when I suppose the whole problem really, yeah, it wasn't really, it's been ongoing, but when it really peaked. So a lot of people like the National Conference and the PDP will say, oh, 1990, we weren't in power, you know, it was theoretically a government at the center that was propped up by the BJP and they should be answerable. But, you know, the killings had begun. The persecution had begun. Islamization of the valley had begun. And that was the Zia project in much before, right? I mean, Zia started seeding the idea of, you know, and unrepentant idea of an irredentist sort of Islamic body politic in Pakistan in the beginning of the 80s, and that sort of flowed over into the valley through terror groups, and you know, there were kidnappings of several foreign tourists, etc. Films were banned. I mean, women were forced to wear the hijab. Kashmiri women never really wore headscarves in that sense. There was always, you've seen those movies and in the 60s and 70s, and the Kashmir ki kali was, very much in your face. And then, of course, groups came up that said that women can't go to beauty parlors, and they had a problem with music, films, all of that was all shut down. So we saw the worm turning in some ways.
Right. So do you think one of the first things they may do is, if this government does come to power in 2024, would be the Uniform Civil Code?
Well, I think they made it quite clear that they're aspiring to it. And I think if you really want to become a secular country, not just in name, but in letter, then you have to adopt the Uniform Civil Code. Of course, people are wrong to think that the Uniform Civil Code will affect only the Muslims. Many Hindus will get affected by it also. Many tribal customs will fall foul of it. So this has to be well thought out. You can't have exceptions, right? The UCC, a lot of the personal laws that are being codified or could become codified under a UCC, they're already being challenged in court. So you have 17 or 18 different practices which are already being challenged in court in the name of upholding secularism. And if those challenges succeed, then basically, willy-nilly, you already have a Uniform Civil Code.
Which is being talked about.
Marriage inheritance rights.
Right.
Those are being challenged for being discriminatory, for being gender discriminatory, or of course, on a religious, anti-secular in that sense. Now, if those are all, the courts say, no, we uphold these challenges, and then you don't need to even bring a UCC, because it will happen.
The Hindu Rashtra, the Vishwa Guru concept, and in a highly polarized environment. And you say the BJP has been calling upon the electorate to vote it back in 2024 to enable India to evolve into a Vishwa Guru. It is for this reason that the G20 summit hosted in New Delhi under India's presidency has become a vital spoke in the BJP's ever-turning electoral wheel. With the NDA seemingly committed to positioning the Second Republic as a spiritual, moral and industrious Vishwa Guru, it also means that it is now more crucial than ever for Hindutva nationalism to shed its truculence. But in a polarized atmosphere, how will this happen?
Okay, so we have to divorce two terms. The Hindu Rashtra, which is a Hindu nation, is not a Hindu state. It's not a Hindu Rajya.
It's a cultural concept that you've said in the book.
Even Hindu Rajyas, when there were in India, they were not exclusivist in any which way. They were guided by Dharma. Now, many people in this country fear Dharma. Why do they fear Dharma? Because they conflate it with religion. And it's a deliberate conflation. And this has been going on for years altogether. And it is more of a Marxist invention in one sense, that, Dharma is religion. Hindu Dharma is not religion. It's a view on life. It's not even a way of life. It prescribes nothing. It just tells you this is how things can be done in an ideal world. You want to follow it, you can. You don't want to follow it, you don't have to. At its essence is ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. That, there is one truth, but the pathways to that truth are many. You can reach it through any means you want.
Right.
And we just saw the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. There was a war there. There's a war just across the Arabian Sea. There's a war in Europe. There's conflict in large parts of the world. And of course, we're also coming out of a pandemic, which was a conflict against an unseen enemy. So, an enlightened nation based on a dharmic philosophy that preaches certain universal but highly moralistic values to the world can only be a repository of good sense.
Right.
And this term is not Modi's term, even though he first referred to it at a rally in Sydney, which was attended by some 20,000 people, mostly non-resident Indians. He wanted, as he said, Mother India to become a Vishwa Guru. But who was he paraphrasing? He was paraphrasing Swami Vivekananda. So I'll read out a little bit from his 1901 essay titled My Master. Vivekananda wrote that India should aspire to be a teacher to mankind. Now, he didn't mean it in some sort of, arrogant sort of way that, oh, we are the repository of all knowledge in the world, please. No, he didn't mean it like that. He says, if you wish to be a true reformer, 3 things are necessary. The first is to feel. Do you really feel for your brothers? Are you full of that idea of sympathy? You must think next if you have found any remedy. The old ideas may be all superstition, but in and around these masses of superstition are nuggets of gold and truth. Have you discovered means by which to keep that gold alone without any of the dross? If you have done that, one more thing is necessary. What is your motive? Are you sure that you are not actuated by greed of gold, by thirst for fame or power? Then you are a real reformer, you are a teacher, a master, a blessing to mankind. Now let me just quickly make this less esoteric and more real. We've just come out of an election cycle where one side said that, look, we must have a caste survey. The motive is to basically give everybody an equal share of our resources, right? I mean, the idea is, but what is the motive? The motive is to win votes from particular constituencies. We should actually be moving towards a society where it's not your identity, but it is your indigence that determines how much the state should actually help you. And what is the narrative? We must have a caste survey so that we can then come up with more quotas. And those quotas must be linked to your population. Jitni abadi utna haq, and so on and so forth. You heard that.
Right.
And the people rejected it.
And you've quoted from Prime Minister Modi's speech where he's saying secularism to him means saturation of policies, which is making policies that is for everybody. And that's the point that you were making. But I come back to my question that in a polarized atmosphere, you've spoken about an idyllic sense of what dharma means, what possibly Prime Minister Modi is guided by. Vivekananda, we know, which comes up, Swami Vivekananda's speeches, etc., come up quite often in what the Prime Minister and even others sort of talk about. But it is a polarized atmosphere. We are going into 2024. In the 9 years, a lot of the probably things that we've seen have been called fringe elements, whether it's why should we celebrate Christmas, whether it's Valentine's Day, amongst many other things. In a polarized atmosphere, how do you think this is going to happen? And, you know, you were reading out of the conclusion chapter that I read as well. One of my questions from that was this, that you have identified 3 things that the government, possibly this government, should keep in mind. Could you elaborate for our viewers what that is?
I think fundamentally, look, there will always be people, and you see this across the world, across the globe. I mean, you look at America, for example, which is supposed to be the mother of democracy, right? That's what they sort of, you know, many people say that they are, and so on and so forth, have had democratic governments for 400 years. Look how divided and polarized they are. Hate flows. In fact, it took almost 350 years for America to get rid of the greatest stain on their state. They had an apartheid. Right?
It is a deeply divided society even now, and they have some very serious problems, there's no doubt about it.
But it is still a very secular nation, right? Despite being actually a Christian nation. So, a Hindu nation, which already has an open worldview, unlike book traditions, Abrahamic traditions, we will obviously be at an advantage. But there are people who are supremacists in every society, right? There are black supremacists and white supremacists, and there are Zionists, and there are, you know, what have you. And you have to remember that those people are also looking to get in somewhere, a foot in the political door. And the state has to be extremely guarded when it comes to indulging them. Now, what have we seen for 70 years? A lot of these fringe elements were actually encouraged. A whole bunch of identity politics, and I'm not talking about just religious, identity politics was allowed to flourish in perpetuity. Even though someone like Ambedkar said that quotas, for instance, as basic as that, and very essential for affirmative action, caste-based quotas, should be done away with, phased out. But we still have them. In fact, as I was telling you, there's a push to enhance them. So identity will always be a factor, and people will always sort of be jingoistic about being perhaps the supra identity and this, that, the other. And there are these parochialists. The government must clamp down on those. And I think willy-nilly, you're seeing that happening more and more now. I think after Mr. Modi consolidated power, he realized that a large number of people were going to also ride on the success of the BJP, and they were obviously of the opinion, those people, that, oh, because we champion Hindutva in this muscular way, this government is not going to do anything to sort of restrain us, because they are basically saying the same thing. No, there's a big divergence between what Mr. Modi thinks and what some of these people have assumed that Mr. Modi thinks. And that I've already established in this book by suggesting how even the BJP has sort of dialed down a large number of issues that once animated it, right? Especially those that had to do with a parochial view, maybe a more Hindu view, as in religious Hindu view of the world, etc., etc. Secondly, political stability. It's very, very important that India is politically stable, but it mustn't come at the expense of shutting down opposition. The opposition itself has a role to play now. And Hindus by themselves, for example, and the BJP itself, while it is shunning the language of, let's call it Hindu supremacism, the opposition must also drop its minorityism. And I don't only mean, Muslim appeasement. I mean standing constantly up for identity-based rights. I think India is now yearning for a new culture of welfarism. And we are beginning to see it being rewarded. And thirdly, of course, is to resist this whole lemming-like leap towards a welfarism which imposes extra costs on the exchequer and on the taxpayer.
Okay. Do you think that is enough? Or do you think citizens from the minority communities feel reassured when they hear something like this?
Look, I don't think that can happen till the opposition also dials down a lot of the fear-mongering. I'm sorry, I do see a lot of it which is completely uncalled for. Look at the CA, for instance. You may have a problem with the government, coming out with policies, but you should have an intelligent argument to rebut it. You can't have an argument based on fear-mongering. So the CA, they said, oh, the CA, you know what it's going to do? It's going to disenfranchise Muslims. They're going to lose their citizenship. The CA is not about denying anyone citizenship. It is about giving people citizenship. Now think about it very logically. And this horrible narrative that was pushed led to, you saw that, violence on the streets of this country. And a fissure which has lurked in the background deepening, right? That is between Hindus and Muslims. So what does the CA do? The CA expedites, not even gives, but expedites already people waiting in line to get citizenship, asylees, from 4 or 5 communities in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh. Now, why were those communities chosen? Because the states themselves are theological states. And in these states, these communities that chose to stay on or had no choice but to stay on were being almost exterminated, persecuted in ways that would make your heart bleed tears. So what did you do? You said, when they come across, which they are, and no one is turning them away, when they come across, let's not keep them in a kind of suspended, animation, a kind of purgatory. Let's give them their dignity by giving them citizenship, by expediting that wait. Right? It doesn't mean that Muslims are not. In fact, Muslims are also coming across. Ahmadiyas are coming. You want Rohingyas to come and you want them to get... Why are they coming to India? They're coming to India because India is a tolerant country. Much more tolerant than the Muslim countries they come from. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru himself had written to Gopinath Bordoloi saying that Hindus fleeing persecution from East Pakistan should be on a priority, given citizenship.
Right.
So the CA only builds on that ideal, which is an Nehruvian ideal.
I know we are running out of time, but I have, very quickly I wanted to touch on these two questions, which were very interesting in your book. I want to go over some of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's images that we've seen, in news in the past, few years. One is, of course, with Ayodhya now coming in, with the Ram Temple, coming in, the Pran Pratishthan happening. And we did see in news when the Bhumi Pujan took place, right?
Yeah.
Probably. It was Prime Minister Modi who did the Bhumi Puja, right? Yes. In your book, you say, ordinarily, a Prime Minister would be a chief guest and the puja would be done by a religious leader. You've taken
I don't think I said that. I'm quoting somebody.
You're quoting somebody.
Yeah, a particular writer, an observer of politics. I think it's Mr. Pradhan, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
He made that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me on that. The other image of Prime Minister Modi when the new Parliament building was inaugurated, and it was about the historic Sengol, right, where he placed it near the Lok Sabha Speaker's chair in the newly built building. And Jawaharlal Nehru had been handed the Sengol during India's independence. While most of us remember the Tryst with Destiny speech, your research says Dominic Lapia and Larry Collins wrote, they sprinkled Jawaharlal Nehru with holy water, smeared his forehead with sacred ash, laid their scepter on his arms, and draped him on the cloth of God. To the man who had never ceased to proclaim the horror the word religion inspired in him, their right was a tiresome manifestation of all he deplored in his nation. Yet he submitted to it with almost cheerful humility. It was almost as if that proud rationalist had instinctively understood that in the awesome task awaiting him, no possible source of aid, not even the occult that he so scornfully dismissed, was to be totally ignored. There are these parallels that keep coming up between Nehru and Mr. Modi. Why do you think that is?
Look, I'm not going to use any strong words, but I feel that the way Nehru has been built up by the left, the yardsticks that have been used to then judge other prime ministers by suggesting that Nehru was this real liberal Templar, right? Actually, Nehru wasn't very liberal. Let me give you an example. So what do people say? Arey, Modi is going to sit there and become Yajman. This is a complete conflation of the state with religion. Nehru would have turned in his grave. At the end of the day, Dominic Lapierre says that Nehru submitted.
Yeah.
With
cheerfully.
Pahunch gaya na Parliament mein. With all his vibhuti and everything. He got there, right? He could have said, no, nothing doing. On Somnath, he put his foot down, yet his cabinet approved the construction of Somnath. Let me tell you, Babri Masjid wasn't the only masjid that was broken to build a temple. There was a mosque in Somnath that was also demolished. Under whom? Nehru's government. The president there was the Yajman, so to speak, loosely put. He was right there. Many of his cabinet ministers were there. Mahatma Gandhi in young India had espoused for the construction of a Somnath temple at that very spot. Now there was a mosque there. So did Mahatma Gandhi obviously prophesize when he was making that statement that that mosque had to be brought down? The first amendment to our constitution was about what? Proscribing what? Free speech. That was the first man. And why did it come out? Because of a very, very, very narrow political interest. Nehru was facing, to a couple of his policies, a large number of protests from land-owning classes. Right? And he says, no, the job of a state and a government, rather, executive, is to have an unimpeded run of implementing its policies. You look at Congress government successfully. What did P.V. Narasimha Rao's government do? Or let's just look at Rajiv Gandhi. Today the Congress is falling over itself to take credit for the Ram temple. They said, look what Rajiv Gandhi did. Rajiv Gandhi, grandchild of Nehru, supposedly extremely influenced by Nehru's liberalism. He wanted to bring the Post and Telegraph Act, which would have pretty much made the press a lapdog. right? This is a policy I'm talking about. Let me tell you, if Nehru and his cabinet can give complete authority to build the Somnath temple, here, under Modi's NDA, his second iteration, it's not the government that is constructed. I mean, that has taken it upon itself to pass some sort of an ordinance or a law to build it's the Supreme Court. It is only executing the direction of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said form a trust where people will be elected. And then you build this mandir. And also the Supreme Court has given 5 acres of land. Were the Muslims given 5 acres when Somnath came up?
Speaking of free speech, my first question was to Rahul Shivshankar, the author. The last one is to Rahul Shivshankar, the journalist. Do you think the current political climate is conducive to healthy democratic debate and dissent?
Oh yes, absolutely. Look at the amount of debate we have. You have a whole stream. You pick up your phone and you dive into a debate a second. Look at Twitter. Journalists on Twitter of every persuasion. You look at our media. I have people come onto my show who use vile invective against, supposedly the most powerful, brutal, Manichaean and, Mephisto-like, not Manichaean, Mephisto-like dictators. And who are these people? Amit Shah. And yet I have somebody who comes onto my show and deliberately says his little piece against Amit Shah, how he has a spine made of molten lava. He uses these expressions, they go viral. You may even know this person. But does anyone sort of hang him up? He's going on mainstream media. You open any newspaper today, you have articles written against the government. You have articles written against the Supreme Court, organs of state. You have articles criticizing the way Parliament is functioning. Or you have articles going the other way, which says that, no, I think we're in the right space, in the right trajectory, this, that, the other. There's debate and only debate. In fact, sometimes I wonder if we just talk too much and get little done, So I think we're a thriving democracy. If they're really addressing the concerns of that quasi-nation state, so to speak, in a manner that is benefactorial, I am Godi media. Then I may as well just say, okay, the job of a journalist is only to ask Modi questions and forget about everything else. These, as I said, are labels. And the people who are putting those labels are the greatest threat to our democracy. Because they would not be adducing those labels if they were actually believers in debate. Now, there is a new label, Musangi. Can you imagine embarrassing a Muslim, going after him because he supports the Prime Minister and the RSS? What are you making him? You're making him a hate figure within his community, presuming that the larger community doesn't like Modi. Maybe there are a lot of people, chup chap, kamal chap. We don't know. So, if you're going to label somebody, make them a target of hate, you're making them doubt their own right to speak up for certain issues without fear and favor. Or favor.
Right.
That I think is horrible. And the people who are doing it are the ones who go around Harvard and all these institutions and talk about free speech. You just have to be worried about the misapplication of laws. That can sometimes happen. I mean, I'm a critic of sometimes what the ED does. Pretty partisan in the way it sort of at least appears to be going after only one bunch of politicians from one particular persuasion and not the other. I'm sure there are corrupt politicians even within the BJP, but sometimes I find that, and I find it difficult, even the ED finds it difficult to explain. There's pin drop silence when you ask those questions about what happened to those cases, etc. Of course, those are aberrations, but that doesn't mean that that'll happen. Every government that comes to power wants to control the narrative. After all, you had the UPA, not saying it was right or wrong. The CBI was called a cage parrot.
Yes.
By whom? The Supreme Court.
Yes.
So and why the first things that various chief ministers do when they come to office is to make changes in police jurisdictions, who's heading what, DSPs, this, that, everyone. I'm not saying that's right, but that doesn't mean that India is becoming, a crazy fascist country.
Right. Rahul Shivshankar, thank you so much for speaking to Brut.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.